Sorry, Mom. It's a classy event. Melissa doesn't want you there. She thinks you're too dramatic. I heard my own son say that, clear as glass. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I swallowed the sting in my throat and said one word. Understood. 2 hours later, my phone lit up with 22 missed calls, his name stacked on my screen like a joke the universe had written for me. We'll get to that part. But first, before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Maybe you're having your morning coffee, or maybe it's late at night and you can't sleep. Either way, I want you to do me a favor. If this story hits you the way I think it will, leave me a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you feel it, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Trust me, you'll want to know how this ends. Now, back to that phone call. My name is Margaret Lewis. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Columbus, Ohio. That Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at my kitchen table clipping coupons, the kind you tear carefully from the Sunday paper because every dollar still matters when you've spent most of your life scraping by. The house was quiet. The clock above the stove ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Then my phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen, and I'll admit, relief washed through me. It had been weeks since we'd really talked, just the two of us. Weeks of rushed texts and brief voicemails. I missed my son. I missed hearing his voice for longer than 30 seconds. There he is, I said as I answered, trying to sound cheerful. I was starting to wonder if my phone company had blocked you. He didn't laugh. There was a pause, the kind that makes your stomach dip before you even know why. Hey, Mom, got a minute? Of course. How's my groom? Another pause. I heard a muffled whisper in the background. A woman's voice. Melissa. He cleared his throat. Mom, look, we needed to talk about the wedding. Finally, I said, forcing a little laugh. I was beginning to think I'd have to crash the thing. Silence again. Then another whisper, sharper this time, right near the receiver. He inhaled like he was bracing himself. So, it's a small ceremony, very elegant. Melissa is trying to keep the guest list tight. She doesn't really want you there. For a second, I thought I heard wrong. The words didn't fit together the way words are supposed to. She what? She feels like sometimes you know, make things bigger than they need to be. Bigger? I repeated. Too emotional, he rushed on. She wants it to be a classy event, no drama, and she's worried you might be, a lot. Too dramatic. Too much. Not a good fit for her pretty photos and curated guest list. My fingers went ice cold. I looked around my little kitchen, at the magnet with his kindergarten handprint still stuck on the fridge, at the coffee cup he'd painted for me in 2nd grade, the one that still said Best Mo because he'd run out of space for the other letter. So your fiancé thinks I'll embarrass her, I said calmly. Is that what you think too? There was a long pause. I just don't want drama, Mom, he finally said. Please don't make this harder. We can celebrate another time, just you and me. I realized then that he hadn't called to discuss anything. He'd called to deliver a decision that had already been made in rooms I was never invited into, a decision about my presence at my own son's wedding. A decision that reduced me to a problem, an inconvenience, something to be managed. My throat burned. My pride, however, stood up straight. I understand, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Thank you for letting me know. Mom, don't be like that, he added quickly. You're not upset, right? I said I understand, I repeated. You two enjoy your classy event. I ended the call before he could answer. For a few seconds, the house felt unreal, like someone had lifted my life, turned it slightly, and set it back down crooked. The clock ticked. The dog kept barking. My hand still held the phone, but it felt like it belonged to someone else. I sat there very still until the hurt turned from liquid to something solid. This wasn't the first time I'd been treated like an accessory instead of a person. But it was the first time my own son had done it so plainly, with so little hesitation, with someone else's voice whispering instructions in the background. I stood up slowly. My legs felt distant. I walked to the sink, ran cold water over my hands, and stared out the window at the neighbor's yard where Daniel used to play when he was small. That's when I made my decision. Not out loud, not dramatically, just a quiet shift inside my chest. If they wanted distance, I could give it to them. In the only language this situation seemed to respect. Numbers. 2 hours later, while I sat at that same kitchen table with a yellow highlighter and a stack of old bank statements, my phone started buzzing. Once. Twice. By the 5th vibration, I flipped it over. By the 10th, I started to smile, just a little. By the time it finally stopped, the screen showed 22 missed calls from the son who hadn't wanted me at his wedding. Turns out, when the bank freezes a card and a venue calls to say the balance on the reception has vanished, people suddenly remember your number. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, sitting at that table with a lifetime of sacrifices stacked in front of you, what would you have done? For most of my adult life, I have been the person in the family who figures it out. That's what people said about me. At church potlucks, at parent-teacher meetings, at the checkout line when my card declined, and I calmly pulled out cash I'd hidden in my coat pocket just in case. Oh, Margaret will figure it out. She always does. They meant it as a compliment. I wore it like armor. But nobody ever asks what happens to the person who always figures it out when everything falls apart at once. Nobody wonders what that costs. I learned the price early. My husband, Thomas, died in his sleep at 49. No warning, no goodbyes. Just a Tuesday morning when I rolled over and realized the man beside me was gone. The coroner said it was his heart. I wanted to ask why his heart had given out when mine was still beating, still expected to keep beating, still responsible for 2 teenagers and a mortgage and a truck that barely started in winter. The funeral was small. Tasteful, people said. I nodded and thanked them and served casserole afterward like a good widow should. Then I opened the mail. The insurance company sent a letter 3 weeks later, the kind written in language designed to sound apologetic while delivering a knife to the ribs. The policy Thomas had paid into for years was 1 line short of what we needed, a technicality, a missed signature on some addendum nobody explained to us. The payout was a fraction of what we'd been promised. No savings, no cushion. Just me, my apron from the diner, and a stack of bills taller than my kid's Lego tower. I had 2 choices. Fall apart or figure it out. I chose the latter because Daniel and Claire were watching. Daniel was 15 then, all elbows and energy, the kind of boy who climbed things he shouldn't and asked questions that made teachers sigh. He'd inherited his father's laugh and his terrible sense of direction. Before Thomas died, Daniel used to barrel through doorways, loud and fearless. After the funeral, something changed. He started watching me with a wrinkle in his forehead, like he could see I was 1 unpaid bill away from shattering. He got quiet in a way that scared me more than his wildness ever had. Claire, my daughter, was 13. She was the opposite of her brother. She wrote lists. She color-coded her school binders. She asked careful questions like, "Mom, do we have enough for groceries this week?" in a voice so small it broke my heart. I lied to her every single time. "Of course, sweetheart. We're fine." We were not fine. I picked up the breakfast shift at the diner on Route 23, the one that smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease, no matter how many times they mopped the floors. I wiped syrup off tables, refilled ketchup bottles, smiled at truckers who left $2 tips and called me darling like it was my name. Then I came home, checked homework, made dinner, and left again at 9 p.m. to clean offices downtown. I scrubbed toilets in buildings where people made more in a week than I made in 6 months. I vacuumed conference rooms and emptied trash cans and tried not to think about how tired I was, because being tired was a luxury I couldn't afford. I did this for years. I didn't buy myself a new coat for 8 winters straight. The sleeves on my old one shined from wear and smelled faintly of coffee no matter how many times I washed it. But Daniel got new textbooks when his school switched curriculums. He got a rented tux for prom. He got gas money so he could drive to his part-time job without asking me for help. Claire got new shoes when hers wore through. She got the science camp she'd circled in the school flyer. She got birthday parties with cake, even if I baked it myself at midnight after my shift ended. They never knew how close we came to losing the house. They never knew I ate cereal for dinner 4 nights a week so they could have real meals. They never knew I cried in the car between jobs, just long enough to let it out before I drove home and pretended everything was manageable. That's what mothers do, I told myself. We figure it out. When Daniel turned 16, he came home one afternoon with an application to bag groceries at the corner store. He said he wanted to help. He said he'd pay for his own sneakers. I told him I had it covered. I never really did. But I wanted him to believe I did. I wanted both my kids to feel safe in a world that had already taken their father. If that meant I worked myself to the bone, so be it. The college acceptance letter from Ohio State came on a Saturday. Daniel opened it at the kitchen table, read it twice, then hugged me so tight my ribs popped. "I got in, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. I actually got in. I held him and felt the weight of what that meant. Tuition, books, dorm fees, application costs we'd already stretched to cover, a future I desperately wanted him to have and had no idea how to pay for. "I'll pay you back," he promised, pulling away to look at me, "with interest. You'll see." I laughed and said what mothers are supposed to say, the line I'd heard my own mother use, the one that sounded noble and selfless. "Family doesn't keep score, honey." He believed me. I believed me. Funny how that line keeps coming back to me now, all these years later, sitting at my kitchen table with 22 missed calls glowing on my phone screen. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped being his mother and started being his emergency fund. And the worst part is, I let it happen. I confused love with sacrifice. I confused care with cash. I thought if I gave enough, worked enough, paid enough, he'd always see me as someone worth keeping close. I was wrong. Betrayal rarely arrives all at once. It leaks in through small moments you brush off, through comments you justify, through Julie you tell yourself is natural. Maybe that's why the wedding phone call shouldn't have surprised me as much as it did. Looking back, the warning signs were there, humming in the background like a refrigerator you stop hearing until it breaks. But before I show you those signs, before I walk you through how a mother becomes a wallet and a son becomes a stranger, you need to understand one thing. I loved that boy more than my own breath. I would have given him anything. And that, as it turns out, was the problem. The year Daniel started college, I opened a second savings account at the bank on 5th Street. The teller was a young woman with kind eyes who asked what I wanted to name it. I thought for a moment, pen hovering over the form. "Project Flight," I said. She smiled like she understood, though she couldn't have. Nobody could have understood what that phrase meant to me. It wasn't about airplanes or vacations. It was about giving my son wings I never had. It was about making sure when he stepped into adulthood, he wouldn't feel the ground crumbling beneath him the way I had. I started small. $20 here, $50 there. Every tip that felt generous, every extra shift I could grab, every tax refund that came in February. I funneled it all into that account and watched the numbers grow with a satisfaction that felt almost holy. This wasn't just money. This was a cushion, a safety net, a way to say, you don't have to be afraid like I was. I kept a notebook, small and spiral bound, tucked in the drawer beside my bed. On the cover, I wrote the same words in black ink, Project Flight. Inside, I tracked every deposit, every sacrifice, every choice I made to build something solid for him. The entries read like a diary of a woman trying to buy peace of mind. Skipped hair appointment, saved $60, added to account. Took third cleaning contract at law firm downtown, exhausted but worth it. Tax refund, $812, all of it goes to Daniel. I told myself this was temporary, that once he graduated and got on his feet, I could slow down, maybe even stop, maybe even do something for myself, though I couldn't quite imagine what that would look like anymore. College tuition ate through money faster than I'd prepared for. Even with his partial scholarship and the loans he took out, there were always gaps. Books that cost $300 for a single semester. Lab fees nobody mentioned until the bill came. An unexpected laptop failure right before finals. Every time he called with that apologetic tone in his voice, I told him the same thing. Don't worry about it, honey. I've got it covered. I refinanced the house to free up cash. I traded the crumbling truck for a used Prius that got better mileage and cost less to maintain. I picked up a fourth cleaning contract, this one in a downtown office tower that required me to work until 2 a.m. 3 nights a week. I was 56 years old, scrubbing floors on my hands and knees while business people slept in their warm beds, and I told myself it was worth it. Because Daniel was thriving. He made the dean's list. He joined a study group. He got an internship at a physical therapy clinic that turned into a job offer after graduation. He called me the day he got his acceptance, voice bright with pride, and said, "Mom, I did it. I'm going to be a physical therapist." I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I could hear the future in his voice. A good future, a stable one, the kind his father and I used to dream about on the porch before everything fell apart. After graduation, Daniel moved into a small apartment near the hospital where he worked. It was cramped and outdated, with a radiator that clanged and neighbors who fought through the walls. He never complained, but I could hear the strain in his voice when he talked about rent and student loan payments and how little was left at the end of each month. That's when I made the decision. I'd been saving for years by then. Project Flight had grown beyond what I'd imagined, thanks to a small inheritance from my aunt and the sale of a piece of land Thomas's family had left us. I sat down with my notebook and did the math. I could buy him a place, not huge, but decent. A condo near his work, something he could live in without the weight of a landlord or the fear of rent increases. It took me 3 months to find the right one. A 2-bedroom unit in a quiet complex with parking and a little balcony that overlooked a courtyard. The asking price was $650,000, more than I'd ever spent on anything in my life. I put it in my name, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted to protect it, keep it safe, make sure nobody could take it from him if something went wrong. When I handed him the keys, he stared at them like they might disappear. "Mom, I can't accept this," he said, shaking his head. "This is too much." "You're not accepting it," I corrected gently. "You're living in it. I want you to start your adult life without feeling like you're standing on a trapdoor." He cried that day, actual tears. He kissed my cheek and said, "You're the best, Mom. I swear I'll make you proud." I thought I already was. Over the next 2 years, I kept helping. His student loans had ballooned to over $80,000, the interest compounding faster than he could manage. I started making extra payments on his behalf, sometimes $1,000 at a time, chipping away at the balance without telling him exactly how much I was contributing. I paid off his car when the transmission failed and he couldn't afford the repair. I covered his health insurance premiums during a gap in his employment. I sent monthly transfers, 200 here, 300 there, just to make sure he had breathing room. My notebook filled with lines. Double shift at diner, sent 500 to Daniel's loan. Canceled cable, extra 40 a month freed up. Used Christmas bonus to cover his car insurance for the year. I felt proud. Tired, yes, but proud. This was what good mothers did, wasn't it? We sacrificed, we gave, we built futures for our children even when it meant we had none for ourselves. I told myself that one day, when he was older and more settled, he'd look back and understand. He'd see everything I'd done and feel grateful. Maybe he'd even help me the way I'd helped him. "I'll make it up to you one day, Mom," he said again on his 28th birthday when I surprised him with a check to cover the last chunk of his student debt. I clung to those words like a lifeline. One day, he'd see me not as a resource, but as a person who had loved him enough to give everything. One day, he'd remember. But as I sat at my kitchen table years later, staring at 22 missed calls from a son who'd just uninvited me to his wedding, I realized something sharp and cold. One day never comes when you teach people that your love has no limit and no cost. I met her on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, 3 years after I'd handed Daniel the keys to the condo. He'd called the night before, voice bright with that particular kind of excitement that meant something had shifted in his world. "Mom, I want you to meet someone. Can you come by tomorrow? Around 2?" My heart lifted. He wanted me to meet her. That had to mean something good, didn't it? That had to mean I mattered in this part of his life. I showed up 15 minutes early with a homemade lemon pound cake, the kind Daniel used to beg for as a kid. I knocked twice, heard laughter inside, and waited. When the door opened, she was standing there instead of him. Melissa. She was beautiful in that polished, intentional way some women are. Perfect white teeth, hair that fell in waves like she'd just left a salon. She wore jeans that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and a silk blouse the color of champagne. "Margaret, right?" she said, stepping aside to let me in. Her smile was wide but didn't quite reach her eyes. "Danny told me you'd be early. Come in, come in." Danny. Nobody had called him that since elementary school. I stepped into the condo I'd bought, holding my cake like an offering, and found her perched on the kitchen counter, wine glass in hand, like she was posing for a photo nobody was taking. Daniel appeared from the hallway, grinning. "Mom, this is Melissa. Melissa, this is my mom." "We just met," Melissa said smoothly, taking a sip of wine. She looked at me over the rim of the glass. "Danny's told me so much about you, about how you got him this place. That's so generous." She paused on that word, let it hang in the air like something fragile. I set the cake on the counter. "I just wanted my son to have a soft landing." Melissa laughed, light and breezy. "Oh, believe me, you've made it a bit too soft. He's spoiled." She said it like a joke, but her eyes stayed on me, measuring my reaction. Daniel laughed too, that nervous sound people make when they're trying to smooth over a moment that feels sharper than it should. "Mom doesn't spoil me. She just helps out sometimes." "Sometimes?" Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Babe, you literally don't pay rent." The air shifted. I felt it in my chest, that small pull of something uncomfortable, something I couldn't name yet. "Well," I said carefully, I wanted him to focus on building his career without worrying about housing costs. Melissa nodded slowly, like she was considering whether that made sense. "That's really sweet. My parents made me figure everything out on my own. Built character, you know." There it was again. That faint edge beneath the politeness. The suggestion that what I'd done was somehow wrong, or at least questionable. That I'd raised a son who couldn't stand on his own feet. Daniel jumped in quickly. "Your parents also paid for your grad school, babe." She waved a hand dismissively. "That's different. That's an investment in education, not just handing someone a free apartment." I swallowed the sting and smiled. "Would you like some cake? I made it this morning." "Oh, I don't really do gluten," Melissa said, glancing at it. "But that's so thoughtful." The visit lasted an hour. I sat on the couch I'd helped him pick out in the condo I'd purchased, listening to Melissa talk about her job in marketing, her spin class, her upcoming girls' trip to Nashville. She had a way of speaking that made everything sound both impressive and exhausting, like her life was a series of curated moments she was narrating for an invisible audience. Daniel seemed lighter around her. Happier, maybe, or maybe just distracted. When I left, he walked me to the door and hugged me tight. "She's great, right?" he whispered. I wanted to say something honest, something like, "She looked at me like I'm a problem she'll need to solve eventually," but I didn't, because he looked so hopeful, and I didn't want to be the mother who couldn't be happy for her son. "She seems very confident," I said instead. He grinned. "She is. I think you two are going to get along great." I nodded and left, and on the drive home, I replayed her words in my head. Too soft. Spoiled. Free apartment. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that she was just one of those direct people, the kind who said what they thought without a filter, that I needed to give her a chance. So I tried. Over the next few months, I showed up when I thought I could be useful. I brought casseroles when Daniel mentioned they were working late and too tired to cook. I ironed his dress shirts when their laundry room flooded and they were overwhelmed. I mailed Melissa a birthday card with a spa gift certificate inside, hoping it might soften whatever distance I felt growing between us. She texted me a thank you, just 2 words and a smiley face. Daniel called less often. When he did, the conversations were short. "Can't talk long, Mom. We're meal prepping." "Hey, sorry, we're heading out. I'll call you later." later never came. And when I did manage to reach him, Melissa's voice was often in the background, light and sweet, saying things like, "Babe, tell your mom we'll visit soon," in a tone that suggested soon was a polite way of saying never. I started noticing small things. The way Melissa would answer his phone when I called, her voice syrupy, "He's in the shower, Margaret. I'll have him call you back." He never did. The way she'd post photos of them at brunches and dinners and weekend trips without ever mentioning me, even when I'd been the one who paid for the gas or slipped Daniel money to cover the hotel. I told myself this was normal, that couples created their own worlds, that I was being oversensitive. But then there were the comments. Small ones, casual ones, the kind that felt like paper cuts. "Danny and I are trying to be more independent. You know, stand on our own. We're thinking about what it means to be a real partnership without outside help." Outside help. That's what I'd become. Not his mother. Not someone who loved him. Just outside help that needed to be phased out. I started trying harder. I sent thoughtful texts. I offered to babysit their dog when they traveled. I asked questions about Melissa's work, her hobbies, her family. I wanted her to see me as safe, as someone who wasn't a threat. But the more I tried, the more I felt like I was being evaluated, judged, measured against some invisible standard. I kept failing. Daniel didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. He just floated between us, trying to keep everyone happy, his smile growing thinner each time I saw him. And when the engagement photos appeared online, beautiful and glowing, I realized something that made my stomach turn. I wasn't being pushed out because I'd done something wrong. I was being pushed out because I'd done too much, because Melissa saw a man who'd been given everything and decided the person who gave it was the problem, not the gift. The shift happened so gradually I almost didn't notice, like watching a sunset. One moment there's light, and the next you're standing in darkness wondering when it got so cold. The phone calls changed first. Daniel used to call on Sunday evenings, our standing tradition since he'd left for college. We'd talk about his week, my week, nothing profound, just the comfortable back and forth of two people who knew each other's rhythms. Those calls used to stretch past an hour sometimes, meandering through topics until one of us finally said, "I should let you go." Then they became 30 minutes, then 20, then 10. "Hey Mom, can't talk long, we're about to head out." "Sorry, we're in the middle of meal prep, I'll call you back." He never did. And increasingly, when I called him, it wasn't his voice that answered. "Hi Margaret, it's Melissa. Danny's in the shower. He just got home from the gym, totally exhausted. I'll tell him you called. He's grabbing drinks with some friends. Want me to have him call you later?" Her tone was always pleasant, always bright. But there was something underneath it, something firm, like a door closing quietly but deliberately. I started to feel like I needed permission to talk to my own son. The engagement announcement appeared on my phone at 9:30 on a Thursday night. I was folding laundry in front of the television, some cooking show I wasn't really watching, when the notification lit up my screen. Daniel had posted a photo, him on one knee beside a river, Melissa with her hand over her mouth, the ring catching the golden hour light. The caption read, "She said yes. Luckiest man alive." 342 likes already. Comments pouring in. Friends and strangers congratulating them, asking about dates, calling them perfect. My phone didn't ring. I stared at the photo for a long time, waiting for the call that should have come first. The excited voice saying, "Mom, guess what?" The chance to hear the news from him instead of from an algorithm. It didn't come. I told myself it was fine. Young people lived online. This was how they shared news now. I was being old-fashioned, expecting phone calls and private moments when everything was public and immediate. I scrolled to the comments section and typed, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I love you so much. She's a lucky woman." I added a heart emoji, then deleted it, then added it again. Posted. I waited for a response. Like, anything. Nothing came. 2 days later, he finally called. I was in the middle of scrubbing the kitchen floor when my phone buzzed. "Mom, hey, sorry I didn't call sooner. It's been insane." Congratulations, honey, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I saw the photos. They're beautiful. Thanks. Yeah, it was perfect. Melissa planned the whole thing. Of course she did. So when's the big day? I asked. We're thinking next fall. She wants an outdoor ceremony. Something elegant. We're just starting to look at venues. That sounds lovely. If you need any help with planning or costs or anything, you know I'm here. There was a pause. I heard Melissa's voice in the background, muffled but insistent. Actually, Mom, Melissa's got it pretty under control. Her mom is helping a lot. You know how it is, mother of the bride stuff. Mother of the bride stuff, as if the groom's mother was just a spectator. Right, I said quietly. Well, let me know if there's anything I can do. For sure. Listen, I gotta go. Love you. The call ended before I could say it back. Weeks turned into months. I heard nothing about venue choices, color schemes, guest lists, or dates. Radio silence, except for the occasional text from Daniel asking how I was doing, surface level and brief. So I did what I always did when I felt helpless. I sent money. I started transferring extra into his account each month, 300 instead of 200, then 400, then 5. I told myself it was for wedding expenses. Deposits and down payments and all the costs that come with planning something big. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be part of it, even if I couldn't be in the room where decisions were being made. One afternoon, Daniel called to thank me for covering the venue deposit. Mom, you didn't have to do that, he said, though his relief was obvious. I wanted to, I said. It's your wedding. I want it to be everything you've dreamed of. Melissa's really excited. The place is gorgeous. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. Future tense, like I'd be there. Like I was included. I held on to those words. A month later, I got a text. Mom, can you help with the florist? They need a deposit by Friday. I sent the money that afternoon. $2,000. Another text a few weeks after that. Melissa found her dream dress, but it's a little over budget. Any chance you could help? I helped. $4,000. I never asked to see the dress. I never asked to come along to fittings or tastings or planning meetings. I just sent what they needed and waited for the thank you text that always came hours later, brief and distant. Then Claire called. It was a Sunday morning. I was rolling out biscuit dough, flour dusting my counters, when my daughter's name appeared on my screen. Hey, sweetheart, I answered. What's going on? Mom. Her voice was low, careful. Have they talked to you about the wedding? Like actual details? A little, I lied. Why? She exhaled slowly. Because Melissa's mom posted in some Facebook group about the seating chart. I saw a screenshot. Mom, I zoomed in, your name isn't on it. My hands stilled on the dough. Maybe it's not the final version, I said, hearing how hollow that sounded. Maybe, Claire replied, but the silence that followed said everything. Did Daniel say something to you? I asked. No, but I've been trying to talk to him about it, and he keeps dodging. Says Melissa's handling all the planning and he's staying out of it. I pressed my palms flat against the counter. Flour stuck to my skin. I'm sure it's just an oversight, I said. I'll ask him about it. Mom, you've sent them thousands of dollars. You should be more than on the seating chart. You should be helping plan the thing. She was right, but I couldn't let myself believe what that meant. Not yet. I'll talk to him, I repeated. But I didn't. Because I was afraid of the answer. Afraid that if I asked directly whether I was invited, he might say no. And as long as I didn't ask, I could pretend the silence meant something other than what it obviously meant. So I kept sending money, kept answering texts, kept pretending everything was fine. Even as the freeze-out continued, even as the distance grew colder, even as I started to realize I wasn't being included in the wedding, I was being tolerated long enough to pay for it. The morning started ordinary enough. I woke at 6, made coffee in the pot that took 3 tries to brew right, and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper. Outside, the neighbor's sprinkler system kicked on, that familiar rhythmic clicking that marked every Tuesday morning in the summer. I should have felt calm. Instead, there was a tightness in my chest I couldn't name. The wedding was 2 months away. I knew this because Melissa had posted a countdown on social media. 63 days until she became Mrs. Daniel Lewis, complete with a photo of her ring and a champagne glass. I still hadn't received an invitation. I told myself it was coming, that they were waiting to finalize details, that any day now a cream-colored envelope would appear in my mailbox with my name written in elegant script. But deep down, in that place where mothers keep the truths they don't want to speak aloud, I knew. I knew something was wrong. I spent the morning trying to distract myself. I sorted through old coupons, clipping the ones that hadn't expired, tossing the rest. I wiped down counters that were already clean. I rearranged the jars in the pantry by size, then by label, then back again. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind quiet. That's when my phone rang. Daniel's name on the screen sent a jolt through me. Relief, hope, maybe even joy. Finally, I thought. Finally, he's calling to talk about the wedding. To ask me about my dress, about whether I wanted to ride with Claire, about what I thought of the venue. I answered on the second ring, forcing brightness into my voice. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. I don't need to tell you every word again. You heard it in the beginning. The careful tone. Melissa's whispered instructions in the background. The words classy event and too dramatic, falling from my son's mouth like they'd been rehearsed. But what I didn't tell you was what happened inside me while he spoke. There's a moment when betrayal hits, where your body knows before your mind catches up. My hands went cold first, then my face flushed hot. My throat closed like I'd swallowed something sharp. I looked down at the table, at the coupons I'd been organizing, and suddenly they seemed ridiculous, pathetic. Here I was, clipping 25 cents off dish soap, while my son stood in a condo I'd purchased, planning a wedding I'd funded, and told me I wasn't good enough to attend. The word that kept echoing in my head wasn't classy or dramatic. It was reclassified. That's what had happened. Somewhere along the way I'd been reclassified, not as his mother. Not as the woman who'd raised him, fed him, worked herself to exhaustion so he could have a future. I'd been reclassified as a problem, an embarrassment, something to be managed and eventually removed. When he asked if I was upset, I almost laughed. Upset didn't cover it. Upset was for missed phone calls or forgotten birthdays. This was something else entirely. This was the moment I realized I'd spent 30 years building a relationship with someone who saw me as optional. But I didn't say any of that. I said, I understand. Those two words were not surrender. They were a choice. A deliberate, controlled choice to stop begging for a seat at a table I'd bought and paid for. When I ended the call, the house fell silent in a way that felt almost suffocating. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I stood and walked through the room slowly, like I was seeing them for the first time. In the living room, there was a framed photo from Daniel's high school graduation. Him in his cap and gown, arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning. I'd worked a double shift the night before that photo was taken. My feet had ached so badly I could barely stand, but I'd smiled anyway because this was his day. In the hallway, there was the handprint magnet on the fridge. Made in kindergarten, his tiny fingers pressed into clay. The paint had faded, but I'd never replaced it. On the bookshelf, a coffee mug he'd made in second grade. Best Mo, because he'd run out of room for the other letters. I still used it every morning. I walked into my bedroom and pulled the shoebox from the top shelf of the closet, the one labeled Project Flight. Inside were years of my life, reduced to numbers on paper, bank statements, loan payment receipts, mortgage documents, my worn notebook with its careful columns and hopeful notes in the margins. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the notebook. Extra shift. Worth it for his future. Skipped dentist appointment. Used money for his textbooks. No vacation this year. Sent him emergency fund instead. Page after page of sacrifices I'd made willingly, lovingly, believing they were building something that mattered. I'd given him everything, and somehow that had made me worthless. Because when you teach someone that your love has no price and no limit, they stop seeing it as love. They see it as a resource, something to be used when convenient and discarded when inconvenient. I thought about Melissa's words that first day we met. "You've made it too soft, he's spoiled." She'd been right. I had spoiled him, not with things, but with the belief that he could take and take and take without ever being asked to give anything back, not even basic respect. Not even a seat at his own wedding. My hands trembled as I flipped through the statements. The condo purchase, the loan payments, the monthly transfers, the wedding deposits. Numbers that told a story I'd been too blind to see. I was funding a life that had no room for me in it. The hurt in my chest began to harden into something else, something colder, something that felt almost like clarity. I reached for my phone, not to call Daniel back, but to scroll through my contacts until I found a different name. Robert Finch, my attorney. The man who'd helped me after Thomas died, who'd always said gently, "Margaret, you need to protect yourself too." I'd never listened before. I'd always put Daniel first. Not anymore. I pressed call and waited. "Hello, this is Robert Finch." "Robert," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's Margaret Lewis. I need to ask you some questions about what I'm legally allowed to take back." Robert answered on the third ring, his voice warm and professional in that way lawyers have when they're billing by the hour, but genuinely, like you. "Margaret, it's good to hear from you. What can I help you with?" I looked down at the shoebox spread across my bed, papers fanned out like evidence at a crime scene. "I need to understand what's mine," I said, "legally, on paper, what I'm allowed to protect." There was a pause. Robert had known me for 15 years, had helped me navigate Thomas's death and the insurance mess that followed. He'd drawn up my will, handled the house refinance, witnessed every major financial decision I'd made since I became a widow. "Are you all right?" he asked carefully. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm just done being taken for granted." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Tell me what's going on." I did. Not all of it, not the emotional weight or the wedding invitation I'd never received or the word dramatic still burning in my chest. Just the facts. The condo I'd purchased in my name, the monthly transfers, the wedding expenses, the years of support that had turned into expectations. And now, I finished. I need to know what I can take back. Robert didn't speak right away. I heard the sound of papers rustling, a drawer opening. "Margaret, the condo is yours. Your name is on the deed. You're not obligated to let anyone live there. Rent-free, family or otherwise. Can I ask him to leave?" "Yes, you'd need to give proper notice. 30 days in Ohio, but yes, it's your property." I wrote that down on a scrap of paper. 30 days. What about the money I've been transferring? If it's coming from your accounts and you're the one authorizing it, you can stop at any time, no explanation required. And the wedding expenses? He exhaled slowly. If you paid deposits directly to vendors and your name is on those contracts, you can cancel them. You might lose some deposits depending on the vendor's policies, but you're within your rights. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly. Something sharper. Control. "What about my will?" I asked. "What about it?" "I want Daniel removed as executor. I want to make sure if something happens to me, he doesn't have access to anything." There was a long silence on the other end. "Margaret," Robert said gently, "are you sure about this? These are significant steps. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "All right. We can update your will, change the executor to Claire or a neutral party, adjust beneficiaries if you want, but I need to ask. Is there any chance you'll regret this in a few months when emotions settle?" I looked at the notebook in my lap, at the years of entries written in my own hand. Skipped car repair, sent money to Daniel instead. Worked through the flu, couldn't afford to miss a shift, sent extra $200. Tax refund, all of it to his student loans. "No," I said quietly, "I won't regret it." "Then let's schedule a time for you to come in. We'll go through everything, make sure you're protected." "How soon can we do this?" "I have an opening Thursday at 10. "I'll be there." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my bedroom and started adding up numbers. The condo purchase price, $650,000. Student loan payments over 3 years, roughly $37,000. Monthly transfers for 5 years, at least $200 a month, sometimes more, $15,000 conservatively. Emergency payments, car repairs, medical bills, insurance gaps, another $8,000. Wedding expenses so far, venue deposit, dress, florist, catering down payment, $12,000. I wrote it all down in careful columns, double-checking my math, making sure I wasn't exaggerating or misremembering. The total made my stomach turn. $722,000. That was a conservative estimate. It didn't include the meals I'd brought over, the gas money, the small gifts, the birthday checks, the groceries I'd bought when I visited, the furniture I'd helped pay for. $722,000 over the span of his adult life. And for what? So he could stand in a home I'd purchased and tell me I was too dramatic to attend his wedding. So his fiance could drink wine in a kitchen I'd paid for and call him spoiled while benefiting from every dollar I'd sacrificed. So I could be useful but invisible, valued but not respected. I thought about all the times I'd justified it. That's what mothers do. Family doesn't keep score. He'll understand someday. But family does keep score when one side gives everything and the other takes without gratitude, and mothers aren't supposed to bankroll their own erasure. I closed the notebook and stacked the papers back into the shoebox, but I didn't put it away. I left it on the bed where I could see it, a reminder of what I was no longer willing to give. Then I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The automatic transfer to Daniel's account was scheduled for the following week. $250, like clockwork, like breathing. I clicked on it and read the details. Started 3 years ago. Never missed a month. My cursor hovered over the cancel button. 1 click. That's all it would take. I thought about calling him first, explaining, giving him a chance to apologize, to realize what he'd done, to make this right. But then I remembered his voice on the phone, the ease with which he delivered the news, the lack of hesitation, the way he'd asked me not to make things harder, as if my feelings were an inconvenience he didn't have time for. I clicked cancel. A confirmation screen appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer? I clicked yes. Then I went through the rest. The shared credit card I'd given him for emergencies that he'd used for dinners and trips. I called the bank and had it deactivated. The savings account I'd set up as a cushion for him. I transferred it back to my primary account. The payment plan I'd set up with the wedding venue. I sent an email requesting cancellation and a refund of whatever portion was eligible. Every click felt like pulling a thread, watching something I'd spent years building slowly come undone. But it didn't feel destructive. It felt like taking myself back. By the time the sun set behind the houses across the street, I had dismantled every financial connection between us. No more automatic support. No more silent contributions. No more being the invisible safety net that nobody appreciated until it disappeared. I made a list of the next steps, things I'd handle in person or with Robert's help, changing the locks, formal eviction notice, updated will, documentation of everything in case he tried to claim I owed him something. I felt tired, bone tired, but also strangely light. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't carrying anyone but myself. That's when my phone started buzzing. Once, twice, 3 times. I picked it up and saw the notifications flooding in. Declined transaction, declined transaction, declined transaction. Then the calls started. I watched his name appear on my screen. Once, twice, 5 times, 10. I didn't answer. I sat there in the growing darkness, watching the missed call notifications stack up like a tower, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The calls continued through the night. By the time I woke Thursday morning, there were 43 missed calls and a dozen text messages, each one more frantic than the last. Mom, call me back. Something's wrong with the cards. Mom, seriously, this isn't funny. The venue is calling about payment. Why aren't you answering? We need to talk. I deleted them without reading past the first few words. At 9:50, I was sitting in Robert's office with the shoebox on my lap and a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. His office smelled like leather and old books, the kind of place that felt serious and safe at the same time. He spread the documents across his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose. "First things first," he said, looking up at me. "The condo. You want him out?" "Yes. I'll draft a formal notice today. 30 days is the legal requirement in Ohio. After that, if he hasn't vacated, we can pursue eviction, but let's hope it doesn't come to that." "And if he refuses to leave?" Robert's expression was kind but firm. "Then we go through the courts. But Margaret, he has no legal claim to that property. You're well within your rights." He pulled out another form. "Now, your will. Currently, Daniel is listed as executor and primary beneficiary. You want to change that?" "I want Claire as executor, and I want my assets divided differently. 50% to Claire, 30% to a charity of my choosing, 20% to Daniel, but only if I predecease him by natural causes and only after a waiting period." Robert raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. "Conditional inheritance. We can do that. Any specific charities in mind?" "Organizations that help older women facing financial abuse from family members." He nodded slowly, making notes. "Understood. What about the automatic transfers and wedding payments you mentioned?" "Already canceled, but I want documentation of every payment I've made to him or on his behalf for the past 10 years. Everything on record. In case he tries to claim you owe him something?" "Exactly." Robert leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, I've known you a long time. I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" "Certain." I met his eyes. "That's because I've never been certain before. I've always been afraid. Afraid of losing him. Afraid of being a bad mother. Afraid of being selfish. I'm done being afraid." He smiled, a small, sad smile. "Good. Fear makes us do things we regret. Clarity doesn't." 2 hours later, I walked out of his office with copies of everything. The eviction notice would be delivered by certified mail the next morning. The will was updated and notarized. The payment records were compiled into a single document that showed exactly how much I'd given over the years. My next stop was the bank. The manager, a woman named Patricia who'd helped me refinance the house years ago, ushered me into her office with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Lewis, your son has been calling. He says there's been some kind of mistake with his accounts." "There's no mistake," I said calmly. "I've removed my financial support. I need to make sure he has no access to any accounts with my name on them." Patricia's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she was professional enough not to pry. "Of course. Let me pull up your accounts." We went through everything. The joint checking account I'd opened years ago for emergencies. Closed. The credit card with his name as an authorized user. Canceled. The savings account where I'd been depositing his cushion money. Transferred entirely to my primary account. "Is there anything else you'd like to secure?" Patricia asked. "I want alerts set up for any attempts to access my accounts or use my information, and I want a note in my file that I'm the only person authorized to make changes." "Done." She typed for a few minutes, then looked up. "Mrs. Lewis, if you don't mind me saying, it takes courage to set boundaries like this." "It takes exhaustion," I replied. "Courage comes later." From the bank, I drove to the florist Daniel and Melissa had chosen, a trendy place downtown with succulents in the window and price tags that made my stomach hurt. The owner recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Lewis?" "Hello. We've been trying to reach you about the final payment for the arrangements." "I'm canceling the order," I said. Her face fell. "Oh, is everything all right? The wedding is only 2 months away. The wedding can proceed however they'd like, but I won't be paying for it." "I see. Well, unfortunately, the deposit is non-refundable. $3,000. I'd expected that. I understand. Consider it a very expensive lesson." She processed the cancellation while I stood there, feeling lighter with each signature. Next was the venue, then the caterer, then the photographer. At each stop, the reaction was the same: surprise, concern, and then the inevitable statement about non-refundable deposits. By the end of the day, I'd lost nearly $8,000 in deposits I couldn't recover. It was worth every penny. That evening, I called Claire. She answered on the first ring. "Mom, Daniel's been trying to reach you. He's kind of freaking out." "I know." "What's going on?" I told her everything. The phone call about the wedding, the decision to stop funding a life that had no room for me, the steps I'd taken to protect myself. She was quiet for a long time. "Mom, are you sure about this?" "Completely." "He's going to be furious. He's going to be a lot of things. But Claire, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to punish him. I'm doing this because I finally realized that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just servitude." "I get it," she said softly. "I just wish it hadn't come to this." "So do I." "Do you want me to talk to him?" "No, this is between him and me, but I need to know you're okay with the changes to my will." "You made me executor?" "Yes, and I've left the majority to you with a portion to charity." "Mom, you don't have to do that." "I want to. You've never asked me for anything, Claire. You've never treated me like an ATM or made me feel like my worth was tied to my wallet. That matters." I heard her breath catch. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room and felt the weight of the week settle over me. Tomorrow, Daniel would receive the eviction notice. Tomorrow, he'd realize this wasn't a mistake or a momentary anger. Tomorrow, he'd understand that I was serious. But tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't waiting for his call. I wasn't hoping for his approval. I wasn't trying to earn my place in his life. I was simply existing, whole and separate, on my own terms. The phone buzzed one more time. His name flashed across the screen. I turned it off and went to bed. The wedding was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday in late September. I woke that morning to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the sound of birds arguing in the oak tree outside. For a moment, before I fully opened my eyes, I forgot what day it was. Then I remembered. Today was the day my son was getting married without me. I expected the thought to hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like I'd already grieved this loss in the weeks leading up to it and had nothing left to mourn. I got out of bed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper, the crossword puzzle, local news about a farmer's market opening downtown, an article about autumn festivals in nearby towns. Normal, quiet, mine. At 9, I called my friend Linda from church and asked if she wanted to catch the early matinee at the theater on Broad Street, some romantic comedy that had decent reviews. She said yes without asking why. I was suddenly free on a Saturday afternoon. I appreciated that about Linda. She never pried. The movie started at 11. I bought popcorn and a soda, sat in the middle row, and let myself disappear into someone else's story for 2 hours. A story where misunderstandings got resolved and people said the things they needed to say, and everything worked out in the end. When the credits rolled, I checked my phone out of habit. 17 missed calls, all from Daniel. 4 text messages from Claire. I opened Claire's messages first. "Mom, are you okay? Daniel's losing his mind. Vendors are calling him. The venue is threatening to cancel. He keeps saying there must be a mistake. Call me when you can." I typed back a simple response. "I'm fine. At the movies. Talk later." Then I scrolled to Daniel's messages. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. I could imagine what they said. Panic, accusation, desperation. The same tone he'd used when he needed something fixed, needed money transferred, needed his mother to swoop in and save him from the consequences of his own choices. But this time, I wasn't swooping. Linda and I had lunch at a small cafe near the theater. She ordered a salad. I had soup and bread, and we talked about her grandkids and the new pastor at church and whether the library's book club was worth joining. She didn't mention the wedding. If she knew about it, she was kind enough not to ask. My phone buzzed 3 more times during lunch. I turned it face down and focused on my soup. At 2:30, I was home, changed into comfortable clothes, and sitting in my backyard with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. The sun was warm, the air smelled like cut grass, and somewhere down the street, kids were laughing. It should have been strange, being this calm on a day that was supposed to matter so much. But it wasn't, because I'd already decided what mattered, and it wasn't watching my son marry someone who'd convinced him I was an embarrassment. At 3:15, my phone rang again. I glanced at the screen. Daniel. I let it ring through to voicemail. At 3:20, it rang again. Again. I let it go. By 4 o'clock, the missed calls had climbed to 22. 22. The number felt almost poetic, like the universe was underlining the irony of a son who'd gone weeks without calling me, now unable to stop. Claire called at 4:30. This time, I answered. "Mom," she said, her voice tight. "It's a disaster." "What happened?" "The venue coordinator showed up and said the final payment never went through. Melissa's mom tried to use a credit card, but it was declined. Daniel's cards aren't working either. They're scrambling to figure out how to pay for everything. And the ceremony? It happened, kind of. They moved it to the gazebo outside because they couldn't use the indoor space without payment. Half the guests left early because there's no reception. The caterer packed up and left. The photographer is refusing to hand over the pictures until someone pays him." I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, some rush of satisfaction at watching everything fall apart. Instead, I just felt tired. "How's Daniel?" I asked quietly. "Furious, embarrassed. Melissa's crying. Her mother keeps making phone calls, trying to fix things. Daniel keeps saying this is all a mistake, that you wouldn't do this on purpose." "But it's not a mistake." "No," Claire said. "It's not." There was a pause. I heard voices in the background, sharp and frantic. "He knows it was you, doesn't he?" I asked. "Yeah, he figured it out about an hour ago. Mom, he's going to come over." "Let him." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. This conversation is long overdue." After I hung up, I sat in the backyard for another hour, watching the shadows lengthen across the grass. I thought about the woman I'd been a month ago. The one who would have dropped everything, rushed to the venue, pulled out her credit card, and fixed the whole mess while apologizing for whatever inconvenience her existence had caused. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who understood that you can't fix people who don't want to be fixed. You can't earn love from people who see you as a resource instead of a person. And you can't keep giving pieces of yourself away until there's nothing left and expect anyone to notice you're empty. The sun set in shades of orange and pink. The air cooled. Crickets started their evening song. My phone stayed silent. At 8, I went inside, locked the doors, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper crossword I'd abandoned that morning and filled in the remaining squares. 12 across. Boundary, 5 letters. Limit. I wrote it in carefully, the letters fitting perfectly into their spaces. Then I turned off my phone completely, something I almost never did, and carried my tea upstairs. For the first time in years, I slept deeply. No dreams, no interruptions, no wondering if someone needed something from me. Just sleep, quiet and complete. When I woke the next morning, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. Daniel would come to my door, and I was ready. They came on Tuesday. I was in the garden, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants I'd neglected all summer, when I heard the car door slam. Then another, 2 doors, 2 people. I didn't look up. I kept working, my hands deep in the soil, watching an earthworm tunnel back into the dark. Footsteps on the driveway, fast and heavy. Then the doorbell, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, the kind of ringing that said patience had already run out. I stood slowly, brushed the dirt from my knees, and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see their shapes. Daniel, tall and rigid. Melissa beside him, arms crossed. I opened the door. Daniel's face was red, his jaw tight. He looked like he hadn't slept. Melissa's makeup was perfect, but her eyes were cold, assessing me like I was something she'd stepped in. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "We need to talk." "All right," I said calmly. "Come in." They stepped inside like they owned the place, Melissa's heels clicking on the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself 5 years ago. We stood in the living room. I didn't offer them seats. This wasn't a social call. What you did was unforgivable, Daniel started, his hands clenched at his sides. You humiliated us. You ruined our wedding. Do you have any idea what that day was supposed to mean? I have some idea, I said evenly, considering I paid for most of it. Melissa's eyes flashed. You pulled funding at the last second like some kind of petty control freak. We had guests there, Daniel's colleagues, my family. Do you know how embarrassing it was when the venue coordinator announced there was a payment issue? I imagine it was very embarrassing, I replied. That's all you have to say? Daniel's voice rose. You destroyed the biggest day of our lives, and you're just standing there like it's nothing? I didn't destroy anything, Daniel. I simply stopped paying for an event I wasn't invited to. We explained that, Melissa cut in. It was a small ceremony, intimate. We couldn't invite everyone. But you could invite enough people to need a venue that seats 200, I said quietly. You could invite colleagues and distant cousins and friends from college. You just couldn't invite me. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd done since he was a boy when he was frustrated. You're twisting this. Melissa wanted a certain vibe, a certain aesthetic. We didn't think you'd understand. An aesthetic I was too dramatic to fit into. Melissa stepped forward. Look, Margaret, I know you're upset, but this is between you and Daniel. You didn't need to punish me for his decision. I almost laughed. Punish you? Melissa, I've never punished anyone. I simply stopped volunteering to be invisible while funding your visible life. You canceled everything, Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. The flowers, the photographer, the caterer. We had to scramble to find alternatives. Melissa's parents had to cover costs we weren't prepared for. Her mother had to call in favors just to salvage the reception. Then her mother got to feel what I've felt for years, I said. Useful. This isn't about feeling useful, Daniel shot back. This is about you being vindictive because you didn't get your way. My way? I repeated, and for the first time, my voice rose slightly. My way would have been a phone call before the engagement announcement. My way would have been a conversation about wedding plans. My way would have been being treated like your mother instead of your emergency contact for financial bailouts. We've always appreciated everything you've done, he said, but it sounded hollow even to him. Appreciated, I said slowly. Is that what we're calling it? Daniel, do you have any idea how much money I've given you over the years? I never asked you to do any of that. You're right, you didn't ask, you just accepted. The condo, the loan payments, the monthly transfers, the wedding deposits. You took it all without question and somehow convinced yourself I owed it to you. Melissa's expression shifted slightly, something calculating behind her eyes. If you're expecting us to pay you back, that's not going to happen. Gifts don't come with strings. You're right, I said. Gifts don't. But respect does. And the moment you decided I was too embarrassing to stand beside you in public, you lost access to my gifts. Family doesn't keep score, Daniel said, and I recognized the phrase immediately, my own words thrown back at me like a weapon. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. You're right, I said quietly. Family doesn't keep score. But you started keeping score the moment you decided my presence was worth less than my money. You kept score every time you answered Melissa's calls but ignored mine. You kept score when you took thousands of dollars for a wedding and didn't think I deserved an invitation. That's not fair, he said. Fair? My voice stayed calm, but something hard crept into it. I worked 2 jobs for 15 years so you could have a future. I wore the same coat for 8 winters so you could have new textbooks. I gave you a home, paid your debts, and asked for nothing in return except to be treated like I mattered. And when you finally had something that mattered to you, you told me I was too dramatic to attend. Melissa opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I don't want to hear about aesthetics or intimacy or any other excuse you've invented to make this sound reasonable. You made a choice. I'm simply respecting it. By cutting us off completely? Daniel's eyes were wet now. By making sure we couldn't even have a decent wedding? You can have any wedding you want, I said. You just can't have it on my dime while excluding me from my own son's life. So this is it? He asked. You're just done with me? I'm done being treated like an ATM with an inconvenient personality attached. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with respect, not money, not guilt, respect. Melissa tugged on Daniel's arm. Come on, she's clearly not going to listen to reason. Reason, I repeated softly. Yes, let's talk about reason. You're standing in a house I've owned for 30 years, angry that I won't fund a lifestyle you've never earned, while calling me unreasonable. The irony is almost beautiful. Daniel looked at me one more time, something broken in his expression. I thought you loved me. I do love you, I said, and meant it. But I finally love myself enough not to disappear just to make you comfortable. They left without another word. Melissa's heels clicked across the floor, the door slammed, the car engine started. I stood in the quiet of my living room and realized my hands weren't shaking. Through the window, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Smith, standing on her porch, watering her plants. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod, the kind that said she'd heard enough to understand. I nodded back. Then I went to the kitchen, made myself lunch, and ate it slowly at the table where I'd raised 2 children and buried 1 husband, and finally, at 68 years old, learned to say no. The phone calls from relatives started 2 days after the confrontation. First was my cousin Janet, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, but who suddenly had deep concerns about my mental health. Margaret, honey, Daniel called me. He's worried about you. He says you've been acting erratic, making irrational financial decisions. I was folding laundry when she called, sorting socks into pairs with the kind of mindless focus that comes from years of muscle memory. I'm fine, Janet, but thank you for checking. He says you cut him off financially without warning, that you sabotaged his wedding. Sweetie, that doesn't sound like you. It sounds exactly like someone who finally set a boundary. There was a pause. But he's your son. Don't you think you're being a bit harsh? He made one mistake. He didn't make a mistake, Janet. He made a choice. And I'm making mine. Family is supposed to forgive, she pressed. Family is also supposed to respect each other. I'll be here when he's ready to do that. She sighed, the kind that said I was being difficult. Well, I hope you reconsider. It would be awful to lose your relationship with your son over something like this. After we hung up, I wondered how much of the story Daniel had actually told her. I doubted he'd mentioned the wedding uninvitation or the years of financial support. Just the part where his mother suddenly became unreasonable. My brother called next, then Thomas's sister, then someone from church whose name I barely recognized. Each conversation followed the same script: concern, gentle pressure, the suggestion that I was overreacting, that I should be the bigger person, that families work through things. Nobody asked for my side of the story. They'd already decided I was wrong. To the ones I cared about, I explained calmly. I didn't shout or cry or justify myself beyond the basic facts. To the ones calling out of obligation or curiosity, I simply said I appreciated their concern and ended the conversation. But it was the social media post that made Claire call me, her voice tight with anger. Mom, have you seen what Melissa posted? I don't follow her on anything, I said. Well, she didn't name you directly, but it's obvious who she's talking about. It's all over her page. Claire read it to me, her voice dripping with disgust. Some people will do anything for control, even destroy their own family's happiness. It's heartbreaking to watch someone choose bitterness over love. Praying for those who hurt us, because clearly they're the ones who need it most. The post had hundreds of likes. Comments poured in from people who had no idea what had actually happened, offering sympathy and support. That's so manipulative. Stay strong, girl. Toxic people never change. I felt a flicker of anger, but it died quickly. What did I expect? That she'd tell the truth? That she'd admit they'd uninvited me to a wedding I'd largely funded? Let her post whatever she wants, I told Claire. People who know me will ask for my side. People who don't aren't worth worrying about. But Mom, she's making you look like a villain. Only to people who were never going to understand anyway. Still, the comments stung. Strangers calling me toxic. Friends of Melissa's sharing the post with their own commentary about entitled parents and ungrateful older generations. Daniel shared it with a simple comment. Sometimes the people you love the most hurt you the deepest. I stared at those words for a long time. He really believed he was the victim in this story. A week later, I received a letter from an attorney I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped when I opened it, but Robert had prepared me for this possibility. The letter claimed that the condo had been given to Daniel as a gift, that I had no right to evict him, and that my sudden withdrawal of financial support constituted emotional and financial abuse. I read it twice, then called Robert. "They're threatening legal action," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Let me see it." I took a photo and sent it to him. 5 minutes later, he called back. "This is a scare tactic. The condo is in your name. The deed is clear. They have no case." "What about the financial abuse claim?" "Ridiculous. You're under no legal obligation to support an adult child. You can give or withdraw financial help as you see fit. This letter is designed to intimidate you into backing down." "I'm not backing down." "Good. I'll draft a response. We'll make it clear that any further harassment will be met with legal action of our own." When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It had come to this: lawyers and threats and strangers on the internet deciding who was right based on a curated version of events. But I wasn't alone. Claire posted her own response a few days later. Not a long essay, just a simple statement. There are always two sides to every story. Before you judge someone, maybe ask yourself if you know the whole truth. She didn't tag anyone, didn't elaborate, but people started asking questions. One of Daniel's friends, someone I'd met at a graduation party years ago, sent me a private message. "Mrs. Lewis, I don't know what happened between you and Daniel, but I wanted you to know that some of us remember how much you've done for him. Whatever this is, I hope you two work it out. But I also hope he remembers who was there when it mattered." It was a small kindness, but it made my eyes sting. Not everyone had been swayed by the narrative Daniel and Melissa were spinning. The calls from relatives slowed after a few weeks. Either they got tired of trying to change my mind, or they realized I wasn't the hysterical woman Daniel had described. The social media posts continued for a while, vague complaints about betrayal and family drama, but eventually those faded too. What didn't fade was the silence between me and my son. No calls, no texts, no attempts to actually talk about what had happened or why. Just the echo of accusations and the weight of a relationship that felt more broken than I'd ever imagined possible. One evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the fireflies blink in the growing darkness, I thought about what reconciliation would even look like. An apology, certainly, a real one. Not, "I'm sorry you were hurt," but "I'm sorry I hurt you." Accountability, an acknowledgement that what he'd done was wrong, not just inconvenient for me. Changed behavior, proof that he saw me as more than a source of money or convenience. But even if all those things happened, I wasn't sure I could go back to the way things were, because the way things were had nearly destroyed me. I'd spent 30 years being the person who fixed everything, who gave endlessly, who swallowed hurt to keep the peace. I couldn't do that anymore. Not even for my son. Especially not for my son. As the last of the daylight faded and the stars began to appear, I made myself a promise. I would leave the door open for reconciliation, but I would never again beg someone to walk through it. Not even him. 9 months later, I bought myself a new coat. It sounds like such a small thing, doesn't it? But when I slipped my arms into the sleeves, felt the weight of the wool, saw myself in the dressing room mirror in something that wasn't worn thin at the elbows, I almost cried. The saleswoman asked if it fit all right. "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. That coat became a symbol of everything that had changed, not just in my closet, but in my life. The condo situation resolved itself more quietly than I'd expected. Daniel moved out 3 weeks after receiving the eviction notice, leaving the keys on the kitchen counter without a word. I hired a cleaning service, repainted the walls, and listed it as a rental property. A young nurse named Keisha signed a lease 2 months later. She reminded me a little of Claire, organized and thoughtful, the kind of person who sent the rent check 5 days early and texted to ask if she could plant flowers in the courtyard. The rental income went into a new account, one I labeled Margaret's Future in my banking app. I used some of it for things I'd denied myself for years: A weekend trip to Niagara Falls with Linda, a pottery class at the community center that met Thursday evenings, a standing monthly donation to an organization that helped older women escape financial abuse from family members. That last one mattered most. I'd found the charity online while researching my own situation, stumbled across stories from women who'd given everything to their children or grandchildren only to be discarded once the money ran out. Women who'd lost their homes, their savings, their dignity. I read their stories and saw myself in every single one. So I gave, not just money, but time. I started volunteering twice a month, helping women navigate legal resources, sitting with them while they made hard phone calls, reminding them that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. One woman, Patricia, was 72 and had been living in her car after her son sold her house out from under her using power of attorney. She cried in my arms the day she signed the lease on a small apartment funded by emergency assistance. "I thought loving him meant letting him take everything," she whispered. "I know," I said. "I thought that too." Helping her felt like saving a version of myself I might have become if I hadn't finally said no. My relationship with Claire deepened in ways I hadn't expected. We started having lunch every other Sunday, long conversations that wandered from books to politics to the complicated grief of watching someone you love make choices that hurt you. She never pushed me to reconcile with Daniel. She understood that some fractures don't heal just because time passes. As for Daniel, the silence stretched on. 3 months after the wedding, he sent a single text. "Can we talk?" I responded, "When you're ready to apologize for how you treated me, I'm here." He never replied. 6 months after that, I heard through Claire that he and Melissa were struggling financially. The rental market was tight. Their combined income didn't stretch as far without my monthly contributions. They'd moved to a smaller apartment, sold the car I'd helped him buy, were living a version of adulthood I'd tried so hard to protect him from. Part of me ached for him. The mother in me wanted to fix it, to send money, to make it easier. But the woman I'd become knew better. Struggle wasn't cruelty. It was education. And he needed to learn what I'd known my whole life. That security isn't given. It's built. And you can't build anything real on someone else's sacrifice. I thought about that first phone call often. The way his voice had sounded when he told me I wasn't invited. The word dramatic echoing in my kitchen. The 22 missed calls that had piled up hours later when he'd realized what my absence actually cost. That moment had been a gift, even though it hadn't felt like one. It had forced me to see what I'd been avoiding for years. That I'd confused love with transaction, that I'd taught him my worth was measured in dollars, not dignity, that I'd given so much of myself away there was almost nothing left. But here's what I learned in those 9 months of silence and rebuilding. You can love someone and still refuse to let them destroy you. You can grieve a relationship without regretting the boundaries that ended it. You can be a good mother without being an endless well of resources. And you can start over at 68 with nothing but your name and your self-respect and build something worth living. I wasn't rich. The rental income helped, but I still worked part-time at the library, still clipped coupons, still watched my budget carefully. The difference was, now I was doing it for me. I bought a small television for my bedroom, subscribed to a streaming service, took myself to dinner on my birthday and ordered dessert without checking the price. I planted a garden that grew more than I could eat and gave vegetables to my neighbors. I joined the book club at church. I said yes to invitations I used to decline because I was too tired or too worried about money. I lived, not extravagantly, not recklessly, but fully, as myself, without apology. One afternoon in early spring, almost a year after that devastating phone call, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of tea when Mrs. Smith from next door came over. "Margaret, I've been meaning to tell you something," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "What's that?" "You look different, lighter somehow." I thought about that for a moment. "I feel lighter." "Good," she said. "You deserve it. I watched you carry the weight of that boy for years. I'm glad you finally put it down." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood kids ride bikes in the street, their laughter floating on the warm air. I thought about what advice I'd give to someone in my position a year ago. Someone sitting at a kitchen table, heartbroken, wondering if setting boundaries made them a bad mother. I'd tell them this: love cannot be proven with receipts. Parents are not ATMs with inconvenient emotions attached. And if someone treats you like an accessory while taking everything you have, at some point you have to stop paying the bill. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of the simple recognition that you matter too, that your life has value beyond what you can provide. That being needed is not the same as being loved. I don't know if Daniel and I will ever repair what broke between us. Some days I hope we will, other days I accept that we might not. But either way, I'm going to be okay. Because I finally learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach him his whole life. How to stand on your own 2 feet. So before I go, I want to ask you the same thing I asked at the beginning of this story. If someone you love treats you like you're only valuable when you're useful, when you're paying, when you're quiet and convenient, at what point do you finally stop funding your own erasure? Think about that. And if this story meant something to you, if you felt it in your chest the way I felt it in mine, leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever had to choose between being loved and being respected. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because every one of us has a story about the moment we finally chose ourselves. This was mine. My name is Margaret Lewis. I'm 68 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio. And I'm not anyone's backup plan anymore.